Hello and welcome to What's the Crack Foundation Series, Episode 3, presented by me, Sammy. And as always, I am joined by Matt, aka Roll Positive Gaming.
Hey guys.
In today's episode, or should I say in the last two videos, we focused on Matt's world as a whole. The idea behind that was to lay the groundwork for these next couple of videos, where we're going to be focusing on Matt's homebrew species. There was a vote that was put out to the community, and the first species that people wanted to know more about were the Ash Elves. However, before we dive into Ash Elves specifically, I wanted to talk about elves as a whole on Sol'Boreal and kind of just lay some foundational context before we get into the specifics. So, Matt, elves as a whole are a little bit different from that of normal D&D canon. Can you touch a little bit on that without going into the specifics about each type?
Well, much like a lot of like other high fantasy, um, I try and ground, even though like my world is different than other things. I try and give some similarity to things to kind of ground it in familiarity. So things that are familiar are a little bit more believable. So for immersion's sake, I do, some similar things like
Hmm.
elves being the progenitor race, or in my case, the first race or species to actually to um awake or step forth into my world as a whole. So like when it came at the end of the age of chaos, when time was started to be recorded and things like that, and the world became something that is more static, it was the Eladrin who named things. They were the ones constantly naming things throughout the age of chaos. So a lot of the ancient Eladrin words for things, including Sol Boreal, still exist. But when the age of chaos ended, the age of I guess you say terrestrial elves, elves that are indigenous to my world, began. Um, the Eladrin themselves are generally creatures of the Feywild, and the planar elves of my world are descended directly from them. And because of the mutability of my pantheon, my world in general, the elven races, or more specifically the high elven races or species, subspecies in this case, are very influenced and to a physical degree by the environment in which they live in. So in the various cases, you have like uh, the elves that live in the frozen north of my world. They resemble, they're referred to as ice elves, frost elves, or snow elves. They resemble physically the environment that they are in. Very pale skin, light colored hairs of various shades from silver to very light blonde, ice colored eyes, like things like that. Whereas, in the case of the one that we're going to talk to today, the Ash Elves, and we'll get into more reasons why, but they live in my version of the Underdark, which is called the Evernight, and a section of it called the Ash Deeps. And their complexion, their coloration resembles the environment that they grew up in. Their eyes tend to be the color of gemstones, their hairs, various shades of, metallics to various stone colors. Their skins can range to like jet black to, deep purple shades to like light ash colored shades to even like reddish hued shades as well. Um, so, that's pretty much the way it is for all of the different subspecies of high elf on my world. And each one of those subspecies lives in its own citadel, which we can get into in a little bit. But in a nutshell, that's pretty much the how they differ from, I guess you could say, elves of other campaign settings.
Okay. I should have prefaced this before we dived in as well, but it's probably paramount that you watch the first two episodes before watching this because there's going to be a lot of terminology, a lot of jargon, a lot of homebrew specific words that you might not understand if you haven't watched those episodes. So not to self plug, but at the end of the day, it's probably for your own benefit. So just wanted to get that in. If you want links to those videos, I'll try to put those in the description, or at this point they'll probably like some form of playlist, and you'll find them in there. So yeah, that's great. Um, so you've mentioned how you have these Eladrin, which in D&D canon and in your world are more tied to the Feywild, but then you've got these planar elves that are descended from them. You said about frost elves. You said about ash elves. Could you name the other types of elves in your world? And am I right in saying they fall under a high elf category?
Yes, they are all like as I have them in D&D Beyond. They actually exist in D&D Beyond. If you're playing in my campaigns, you have access to them. But they actually are playable as part of a subspecies of high elf. So they're my version of the high elves. That's all. There's subtle differences, but for the most part, they have like a very similar physical uh, appearance, with the exception of the environmental effects uh, that they all display different. And let's see. Let me actually do this. I will bring up my list so that I can give you at least. I will give you the. I'll give you the spoken names of the various citadels, because as I have found, most people.
Well. That's actually a question I've got for when we go into the Ash Elves specifically. So maybe save the full names when we go into the different ones.
Okay.
You can just do the general names like with like Ash Elf, unless you don't want to do that.
No,
But it kind of
I will give whatever information you're looking for. I will happily share that with you, my good sir. So, so yeah, we can delve into that stuff. That's not a problem. Um, but let's see. So, as I had mentioned to start with, in the far north, is Freyath Boreal, and they refer to themselves as the Freyathi, and those are my frost elves, of which some of my more prominent characters that are in some of my campaigns are, including yourself. Uh, to We have the summer elves, which is called Sol'Boreal, and they refer to themselves as the Bereni, and they are representative of, like, their exposure to the sunlight has kind of given them. I kind of wanted to go uh with a sort of an Australian Aboriginal kind of flavor. Like I had said, like I don't take direct cultures, and I kind of I pull flavor from actual real world cultures to ground my world in a sense of familiarity, which just enhances its believability, your immersion. So I kind of adopted for the summer elves the complexion, where they are dark skinned but light haired, where they are in a constant exposure to the sun. So they revere the sun. They are they're they actually live on a very high plateau, and they throughout the year they have some of the most, the majority of their years in exposure to sun. And their culture kind of is flavored around the exposure to that sun, so it pulls in culturally from various uh, cultures that are also sun worshippers. So again, it's about flavoring without actually, like, I'm not trying to do any actual cultural appropriation. But the summer elves are so flavored. I actually have a summer elf in play in one of my campaigns currently. Then there is, now I'm not gonna spoil anything with this one, but there's Vas Mareth, or rather the Marethi elves, which are the autumn elves, and theirs is kind of an upcoming deal. Since we're only working on the Ash Elves, I'm not going to spoil anything, but their situation is unique to the rest of the elven cultures. There is the Shale Fayad, or the Fayadi. Actually, I'm sorry, Sheali, where, correction, Shalar, which is of the sky and of the heavens.
We got there eventually.
Yeah, I'll get there eventually. But terrestrially are referred to as the Fayadi. They themselves are connected to the celestial realm, and they are often referred to as the Sky Elves because they live on a very high peaked mountain called the Sky Spear. And again, their complexions reflect their environment. For them, their exposure to the celestial realm gives them more of kind of like your divinity, your traditional divine angelic look, where they have, I guess, of all of them, they sort of represent the true high elves in just about every other campaign setting. They probably look the most like what you would expect a high elf to look like. And before I cover the Ash Elves, I will make mention of the Espariel, the Azshari, who were the Spring Elves, whose culture was almost completely wiped out. They were nearly destroyed during the first Dark Tide, and their culture was almost lost, and it is only preserved in what are now Wood Elves on my world. The survivors of the tragedy that befell the Spring Elves forced the survivors into the wilderness, where they were then influenced by their environment once again and became, through generations of exposure, the Wood Elves of my world. And that brings us to the Ash Elves. And instead of me just giving you a summary, why don't we just start digging into the meat and potatoes?
Yes. Before we do that, I do have some more general questions though.
Sure.
But that was great. So, I think you obviously kind of hinted at it, but just to confirm, do some of your elves, or Eladrin, I guess, exist in the Feywild and or other planes of existence as well?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, I mean, I guess that goes into describing the physical connectivity the societies have with my world. All of the citadels, because all of my elven cultures, well, high elven cultures specifically, they exist in citadels, basically guarded and walled cities, protected by magic and the environment that they live in. And they are literally bridges between my world and another plane. To give you an idea, Boreal, the Frost Elves, your ancestry, Charlotte, their citadel is connected to a frozen section of my world, but also connected to the winter, I guess, the winter biome or landscape of the Feywild. So literally, you could enter the city from Sol'Boreal, from my world, walk to the other side of the city, and leave it, and you are now in the Feywild. And somewhere in between, you cross that line. So it exists in both simultaneously. It is an open gateway.
I'm guessing that's like guarded though, and it's like you have to get special permission to go through. And
well, within the city, the elves, the thing is a lot of the elves, especially the younger elves, don't realize what has happened. You see, this goes back to my history, and it was because of the fall of the Spring Elves that the rest of the cities decided, maybe we don't want to be here. at least not entirely. We need to take contingencies so that we're not lost completely. So what they did was, through their magic, power and ritual, they took their societies. They basically moved everyone into these cities so that they don't live outside of them, and those cities were then anchored between. They created the rift that these cities represent the gateway to between my world and another realm. And the idea is, if there was another dark tide, then they would be able to close themselves off completely and just bail and leave,
Right.
and basically exist on that other plane as a kind of a last ditch effort, a final defense measure. But the problem is, because of the magic of the elves and the mutability of the species of elf that exist on my world, if they spend too much time in the other realm, then they eventually start losing their connection to the terrestria of Sol'Boreal. They stop being, attached. They become like Fae in the what we call it, the example, the Freya Boreal, the Frost Elves. They would become permanently Fae creatures. So they kind of did some kind of almost like a magical eugenics thing where, they need to maintain a percentage of their population as terrestrial to Sol'Boreal so that they remain connected, while they still have a connection to that other realm in the form of Eladrin. So you have often marriages either arranged purposefully or encouraged through social interaction, between Eladrin and High Elf. And you have families that exist on both sides, or at least have relatives on both sides, so that there is always a percentage of the population that exists and is still attached to Sol'Boreal. So yeah, it seems kind of extreme, but they completely almost lost one of their citadels. So it was a kind of like the council got together and decided, this is now what we're going to do. This is going to be our contingency plan, because they blamed the other races. So if any of the species or subraces or races of elves on, or any races themselves in general, are can be bigoted or racist, it is the High Elves. It are the High Elves on my world. However, it is often because of the elders of those societies that those beliefs exist at all, and it is the younger elves that have questioned it and began exploring and pushing the boundaries and leaving those citadels. At the present time of my world, where it is 253 years past the last dark tide, through the efforts of a sort of legendary figure that would unify, become the first speaker among voices for all of the elves, unify the citadels, ends up bringing them back. And instead of them fleeing from the dark tide, they end up coming back and joining the fight against it. And because of that, this first speaker got them to open their doors and start to rejoin society. So at the present time of my campaign, while still fairly new, the elven societies are reaching back out and making new and recreating old connections, politically, socially, and what have you. So they're starting to reemerge and become a part of the world again.
That's interesting. It's one of those ones where I could ask follow-up questions, but obviously I want to save, as much content as possible for future videos
Sure.
where we talk about each one. So the last question, like for general, in terms of general elf information, is what type of lifespans do the elves on your world have?
I haven't really changed that, so it's like, what is it? I think 1,200 to 1,500 years or something like that. They generally live somewhere in there.
Okay, and
Actually,
do
I
you have?
think that might be a Ladrin, and I think,
Yeah, I think
is it
so.
750 or something like that for
It's like
elves?
it's like 800, 900. Yeah.
Yeah, somewhere around there. So it's pretty standard for elves. I haven't changed that.
Okay. Yeah, well, that'll wrap up the introductory section, and now we're going to dive into Ash Elves. So again, could you give the full name for the Ash Elves just to start us off?
So, so they are, as I had previously said, like each one of them, yeah, I mentioned the Citadel. The Citadel and the name of the peoples are kind of synonymous. In this case, for the Ash Elves, it's the Ashar Faz Makin, the Ajar Faz
Ash-
Makin, or the Azshari.
Azshari. Okay.
Yes, so the Ajar Faz Makin is actually the name of the Citadel as well as the people. So they refer to themselves as the Azshari. The rest of the world refers to them as the Ash Elves.
Yep. And you said before the elves in your world are more defined by their geographical locations. So can you tell us where you'd primarily find a community of Ash Elves on your world?
In the Evernight,
And the Evernight
for
is
the
your
majority, so I guess of the elven nations, the least, I guess the least expansive. While they have made efforts to sort of rejoin Sol Boreal socially, politically, just like the rest of them, they are probably the least likely to be encountered in its own like settlement outside of Jarfaz Makin. There's a reason for that though. Um, when the so Jarfaz Makin was supposed to be connected to another part of the Feywild, but something changed their plans when a certain family named the Blackmorns, which you can actually get more information on in a previous video, decided to try through ritual and sacrifice in a very large way tear open a rift into the first level of hell, also known as Avernus. That rift also happened to be very close to where the the Azshari had their citadel. So next thing you know, you have demons flooding in, and you have devils engaging them in combat, and in the middle is this society of high elves from Sol Boreal. So they acted, and thank the passions they did, because where they existed there was a lot of veins of adamantine, which is that precious metal
Mhm.
that is super hard, you know. So before they were completely destroyed, like they went to work and they fought and held back basically both of sides of the blood war, which is the demons versus devils, and they fought them back and kept them at bay long enough for the Ash Elves to create the adamantine wall. And they literally, or rather, the adamantine gate, because it is literally a gate between dimensions and, or rather, realms, if you're going with the cosmology for D&D.
Mhm.
And that began their watch. They created the gate and sealed off the terrestrial connection to Sol Boreal between the two worlds, between Avernus and my world. And they now stand guard on that gate, constantly fighting back the forces of the abyss, and it was that effort that prevented the demons from spilling over into our world, because they wanted to do that as well. So they shifted gears and had to rechange everything. So now their citadel exists half connected to Avernus and half connected to my world, in what is my version of the Underdark called the Evernight, and more specifically the Ash Deeps of the Evernight, which is a part of it that is heavily influenced by demonic exposure, demonic and fiendish exposure, because that covers both. So the elves themselves now physically manifest features of that exposure as well.
Okay. Because like a follow-up question I had was, have these elves adapted to life in the darkness? You said they live in the Evernight.
Yes. My one of the physical traits that they have is they actually have blind sight out to 60 feet, which is
Wow.
really good.
Yeah, that is really good.
So they have blind sight. They don't have a lot of the same features and traits that other elves above ground generally have, but they have learned to fight the forces of darkness in the absence of light, and and they just kind of have like a sixth sense, like their ears. Often in my own, I've seen them represented differently, but their ears tend to be more bat-like than elven. Sure, they're pointed, but they have that little extra kind of like bat shape to them.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that is a common trait amongst the Ash Elves. But other than that, they are also influenced by the mineral content of the world around them, including adamantine. I mean, there are veins of adamantine that they spend a lot of time around. You'll find that there are a lot of weapons and things, implements, armor, and stuff like that are also made of adamantine. So that kind of flavors their physicality. But because they also live basically in mine shafts underground, great geodes of gemstones, they're that kind of mineral exposure also affects them in their eye colors, and often sometimes even in their hair color. But their skin often takes the pigmentation of anywhere from the deep dark of the stone, or the red desiccated clay that is Avernus. So you can have that kind of like deep dark red brown skin
Yeah, I know what I
tone.
mean. Mm-hmm.
But they are still elves through and through, and oftentimes people like, well, are those drow? And not quite on my world, because let's face it, there is that stigma of the drow socially, that you have a society of dark elves that are basically, BDSM. It's racism, like at its best. In order to avoid that kind of stuff, I wanted to do my own thing. But drow do exist on my world, at least statistically. So the monstrous entry of them in the player, I mean the monster manual, exists, yeah. But those are elves. Those are Ash Elves that have made deals with demons and or devils, and have been corrupted by that magic. So they are actually apostate. They are no longer part. They're outcasts and enemies of the state, as it were. Mm-hmm. The Ash Elves themselves are very heroic, stoic, and stalwart. They are true heroes and champions of the realm, even though the vast majority of people in Sol'Boreal have no idea.
Just because they're so like reclusive.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I mean, you say they primarily exist in the Evernight and around their citadel, which I don't remember the name off the top of my head because it's a nice
Ajar
fancy word.
Vazmakeen.
There we go. Do they exist anywhere else? Is there similar types of environments, geographical environments where there's these portals and maybe they've set up elsewhere, or have you not fleshed that out?
Well, so the Evernight exists in my world. Like it's just like, in any of the, it is the Underdark. It is that biome. It exists in various parts of my world. But the reason why you're not going to encounter pockets of Ash Elves anywhere else is because of the cultural design, the social design that the High Elves on my world created, where they consolidated all of their people into citadels, which is why they exist in only one spot. At this point, though, I mean, they are trying to reemerge. So in your game, you could have like a pocket settlement of them anywhere, like outside of, their citadel in the Evernight or on the surface. It doesn't matter. But for the most part of all of the elves, they stay the most focused, and it's because of the purpose that
Yeah,
they have taken on the mantle of guardians.
yeah. I know I'm privy to some information, but it sounds like the Ash Elves. If you were to classify them as a D&D class, they sound very paladin-esque.
Very, very common. If you were to encounter classes, yeah, you're going to see a disparate number of clerics, paladins, fighters. You'll see your rangers and stuff like that, of course, because your ranged ability is important, and your ability to track and potentially traverse the surface of Avernus. You're going to see probably a disparate number of those, with a lot of mages in between. Just because the study of arcane is also important, especially when you're dealing with
Right.
binding and dealing with probably more specifically fiends than, devils than demons. But you'll see that things that you won't see a lot of, for obvious reasons, are warlocks.
Yeah, because you said like they're the drow basically.
They have, well, even any kind of a warlock, you've basically made a deal with someone for power.
Mm.
That doesn't sit well with Ash Elves in general. It's like, okay, you're kind of, I don't care why you're coming at it. You had to make a deal with something else to have power. Why do you need that power? When we ourselves, like, are you, like, you might see like a celestial warlock, like that is something, but even then, the idea of making a deal with another entity to become beholden to that entity to grant you the abilities that you need is sketchy to them. They don't like that kind of thing, because while the demons may assault the adamantine gate physically, the fiends tend to attack it a little bit more mentally, and they come at you through your social weaknesses, mental weaknesses, and that's how let's just say there are more drow that were created by devils than there are demons.
Hmm.
So yeah, if you're going to see any kind of a warlock, it would be a celestial pack, maybe a fae.
And Archfey, yeah. Yeah, I mean, the next question I had was like, in terms of appearance, how can you define an Ash Elf from a different variation? But I think we've touched enough on that. You've talked about the skin and the hair color. Unless there's anything else you want to add there, we can go into like the mechanics a little bit.
Sure.
You've mentioned about the 60 feet blind sight, but in D&D canon, when you've got like these Underdark races, or in your case the Evernight race, they normally come with like sunlight sensitivity. So is that a thing as well?
No, and there's a reason for that. Creatures that exist in Sol'Boreal. So I guess we'll have to get into a little bit more of the foundational stuff. The races and beings and the material itself, the physical makeup of Sol'Boreal, all came from pieces of the realm of darkness. When Sol, the unbound star, crashed into the realms of midnight, it created the void of light that pushed back most of the darkness. Well, there were pieces of that remained floating in that void of light, and instead of being pushed or destroyed, were changed and became something different. And it were the original gods, were not gods at the time, that realized that they had the ability to manipulate that stuff, created the world and the peoples that live within it, and what have you. So anything that is technically pretty much bound to Sol'Boreal is not adversely affected by the light. They are more or less actually emboldened. They exist because of that light.
Right.
Which is why I didn't want to give the Ash Elves sensitivity to light. Because even, when you think about the things that are sensitive to light, or rather sunlight, they're all generally evil things. Things that are afraid of the exposure, so to speak.
Well, it's like drow or kobolds normally.
Right. So, yeah, I didn't want them to have that kind of a light sensitivity.
Yeah, that makes sense. No, that makes total sense. And I think you shouldn't you shouldn't burden your players with like negative things like that, because most of the races or sub races don't really come with like a negative mechanical thing. There obviously might be negatives to the backstory that you create, but yeah, that makes sense. So I mean, I kind of know this question, but have you ever had a player play an Ash Elf before, and could you tell me a little bit about them and talks you had with that player during character creation?
So yes and no. The first Ash Elf that I have being played is being played by Virla. And while we did have discussions about, like, to a degree, what the Ash Elves are all about, her character began with amnesia. So we had sort of like kind of like the foundational aspects and beliefs and things like that of the Ash Elves covered, but the minutia and details still elude her at this point.
Okay.
So to a degree, yes, I have talked to her about it, but yeah, no, there's still a lot that she doesn't know. But that's, all part of the story.
Well, it's very interesting because my character Charlotte, who we've touched on a little bit in these episodes, naturally because I'm hosting, she's a frost elf, but there's a similar type of journey of discovery going on. Charlotte's story is different to Alithia's, who's the Ash Elf, but Charlotte grew up in a humanistic society and was, if she couldn't look herself in the mirror and see the elvish features, she would, all intents and purposes, believe herself to be a human, because that's how she grew up. So that elven heritage, that elven culture, was kind of robbed from her. So you've got these two people in the party who are elves, but they want to know more about about what it means to be an elf. So it's quite interesting.
Yep. Yeah, that's true. We have they're all disaffected in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
When you think about it, that is the truth.
Because the other elf who is in the party currently at the time of filming this, but is moving to the new Wednesday campaign, A Borrowed Likeness. Check that out. That'll probably be out or just about to come out at this point by the time this goes live. So that's Amy Kay, who plays a wood elf. But they've been isolated on this Isle of Tyrants for
15 years.
Yeah, several years at this point. So I'm sure Amy has her own journey of self-discovery around the corner as Illyria.
This is very true. Very true.
So it's interesting. I guess the next question is, it doesn't have to be Ash Elf, but have you ever had someone that's played an elf that was more was more in line with one of these citadels and inherently the
my own
culture and
wife.
stuff like that. Okay.
So my wife is, I guess you could say, she's in my foundational campaign. It's been going on for like almost 5 years now.
Jeez.
And it was the campaign that really built my world, that we fleshed things out. And her character, she's playing a frost elf, but her character grew up in frost elf society, so she understands how they thought, and she understood how, their beliefs, at least from the perspective of a frost elf, because all of the citadels have their own little, tweaks
Yeah.
and differences.
Yeah.
And it was her character that didn't agree with their stance on things, and she ended up escaping. She fled off into the basically escaped and fled out of the citadel and made her way to Teveria, and ended up in Avamere, the capital city of Teveria, where she met a gnome who took her in and helped her get her started outside of her citadel.
Yeah.
So her character was founded and very grounded in that belief. So throughout this campaign, she's been role playing as like, she wants to know everything about everything. She's very curious and with a very specific penchant for cooking at the moment. So she wants to try and taste all these new foods and whatnot. So she kind of throws that into her character, but she is kind of like that, starry-eyed child who's seeing things for the first time. So she's realizing that the world is very different outside of those walls than they told her it was from the point of view of inside those walls.
Mm-hmm.
So I have had character who was very grounded in that lore.
And the actual culture. Yeah, it's interesting. I know we've touched on kind of the dark tide and like the portal keeping and the whole thing that happened with the black moors, I think you said. But
Black
across the
Morn.
history, Black Morn.
Yes.
Yeah, across the history of Sol'Boreal, like, has there been any other big contributions to society that the Ash Elves have played in? Any like major events, kind of aside from those, or is that those are the big ones?
as if saving them from a hellish incursion isn't big enough.
I know.
That's just it. They are the silent heroes. They are the champions that go unsung because the world in general doesn't know about it. Why? Because there aren't demons running around all over the surface of the of Sol'Boreal. So it's kind of like, they don't realize how close they are to that danger, and it's because of the efforts of the Ash Elves that they are safe. They are being kept safe. So they are, for the most part, unsung heroes. And as far as like further contributions, their hands are a bit full right now, so they haven't gone out of their way to, kind of offer help and everything else, considering what they have to deal with. So
Yeah. Where was I going to go next? Oh, yeah. So you have these different like high elf settlements, citadels. Is there like a council of these elves that get together, and is there an Ash Elf representative and things like that?
yes, so each of the citadels has a high speaker that holds the first chair, and oftentimes they use like music, like choirs and choruses and things like that, as references to positions of power. But there is a high speaker for each of them that sits in the first chair, and then there is also the first speaker, who is first among all of them. That is the I don't want to say deific figure, but that is the legendary individual that would unite them all. So basically, the high there each citadel has a high speaker, but then there is the first speaker, the one who speaks first among all, and that
Okay, and
is
are they affiliated with one more? Sorry, one citadel rather than the rest, or are they like?
so technically yes, because I'm going to give you another little spoiler here. My wife is back there listening. It's my wife. Her character in the Sunday campaign, which is my foundational campaign, which is basically creating the most recent history.
Yeah.
Her character's story is that she becomes the first speaker. She's the one that unites the citadels of elves to rally them to fight against the current, or rather the most recent incursion of the Dark Tide. And and so she becomes the first speaker. So she becomes the voice that all of them, while they still have their own ideas and things like that, if there comes down to any kind of a dispute, you know, she is the one to break ties. It is her decision to basically resolve any kind of an issue. Well, she doesn't necessarily rule over them. She's not an all-encompassing "I'm the queen of all elves" kind of a thing.
Okay.
Her position carries the most weight. She's only ever petitioned if necessary, but she's also treated with the deference of her position. So when she's around, you know, obviously it's like, oh, she's the first speaker. They treat her with, you know, with respect, but she doesn't go out of her way to tell people what to do.
Right, I understand. Yeah.
And it kind of goes part and parcel with the way she plays the character too. It's like, you know, she doesn't want to be anybody's boss, but she'll tell you, you know, she has no problem saying, listen, this is how it should be.
Mm-hmm.
So she understands, like the character understands the weight of that power and doesn't offer that kind of any kind of resolute expressions because they might be taken wrong. You know, like I'm dictating policy and things like that. So she's kind of an enigmatic figure at this point. But yes, there is a first speaker among all of the high speakers.
That's cool for her, though. I love that for her.
Mm-hmm.
I hope we meet your wife's character in the game.
You very well could, because of all the characters from that campaign, she's probably the only one that's still alive.
That's gonna be so good. Maybe I have to bring her on for a special guest.
It's possible. See how she feels.
No pressure, Ange. Okay. Well, I'm gonna give you. Yeah, I'm gonna lead. I'm gonna say, is there anything we haven't touched on that you'd like to bring up regarding Ash Elves that you think the audience needs to know before we wrap up today?
Well, so there is. They create a certain. Now, most of my societies have some kind of like an export or something like that, and the Ash Elves are no different. And they create a form of silk that incorporates precious metals and things like that. That is how would I say it? It's infused often with precious gemstones. So it is a material, like it is their, like it's a fashionable material. It's not like it's armor or anything like that, but it can, if infused with certain materials like mithril, silver, you know, things like that, can offer some defensive properties. But because of the nature of the bioluminescence that exists within the Evernight, the garments that they create are basically infused with gem dust. So amongst the black light, it gives them the appearance as though they are wearing cloth that looks like a galaxy. I think somebody actually said it. They look, you know, like a starry sky.
Mhm.
that reflects a lot of the bioluminescence of the Evernight itself. So underground, it looks amazing. It's like, super fashionable. But if you get above ground and you get exposed completely to the light of Sol, you look like a disco ball. You resemble you look like Edward Cullen on a beach day. Okay, for all of you Twilight fans out there, you're that glowy vampire. You just sparkle and twinkle and whatnot. So above ground, it's not quite as fashionable as it is in the Evernight, but they make this specific silk, often called night silk, because it comes from the people of the Evernight. But yeah, they produce that material. So that is one thing that you can get that is specific to Azshari Makeen.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, well, we've mentioned in a previous episode where you've got your winterberry mead, which comes from the Stogan Var gnomes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
I like little details like that. Nice. It's cool.
Yeah, and we'll get to the snake silk at some point when we talk about my the Quatling.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one. That was the one I wanted to be first. So, but I love all the elf lore because obviously Charlotte's kind of intertwined with it all, and Charlotte's taking a lot of inspiration with some of her like blade song forms from these different elven cultures and things like that. So it's interesting. Anything else you wanted to add?
I don't think so. I mean, there's probably going to be a lot of minutia, a lot of fine details that will be added. I guess if we're going to cover like anything like flavor wise, you can think of the architecture of the city of Azshari Makeen as also being influenced in that kind of hellish landscape. It's very gothic in nature, dark stone with dark steel crenellations and like vampire, Dracula's castle kind of thematic
Nice.
going along with it. So a lot of the architecture itself for the city looks like that. So it looks at first glance, if you're looking at it, very dark and sinister.
Yeah, like, oh, bad guys live here, but actually these are the people that are keeping out the bad guys.
And it's literally the buildings have all of those, dangerous looking crenellations and things like that along the top. Gargoyles that might actually be gargoyles. Razor sharp, spikes and things like that coming off the top. Why? Because buildings, the architecture of Azshari Makeen is not just supposed to be beautiful, it is functional. Like those buildings need to be defensible should the gate be breached. So they are also fortified to a degree. So you're going to see that kind of an architecture as well within the and I guess actually that kind of like Ash Elves that are away. I just want to add this Ash Elves that, because you had covered like where would you encounter them outside. Yep. Ash Elves that are away from and exist away from their citadel might look at architecture and defenses and design and things like that outside of that with a bit of disdain, like, because a house should just not just be a home, but it should also be your sanctuary kind of a deal.
Fortress.
Yeah, so like just seeing like little farmhouses dotting the landscape, it's something I never really kind of thought about because Virla is my first Ash Elf being played, and she has amnesia. So,
poor Virla.
Yeah, well, by her own request. So I never really thought about it, but yeah, they might see, and since they have that kind of survivalist or militaristic mindset in just their general culture, might look at it and be like, it's kind of a useless building. Your house kind of sucks because I could breach it here, here, and here. They might look at it like where are the safe spots, and so it's not something I ever really thought about. But yeah,
is that like? I mean, I might be wrong, but to me that sounds like almost like a PTSD response.
Yeah, it's when you grow up in a society where you are hypervigilance is something that you are taught from birth, then yeah, I could say that it does kind of cover like PTSD. I guess you could say it's like pre-traumatic stress disorder, because you're like, whether or not you've seen anything, any like real shit, you grow up under the
It's the
pretense that you
anticipation.
will. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the anticipation of it. Yeah.
So
Yeah, I'm excited to see how Vila's story evolves, and I hope you do go to the Evernight, because personally, I'm a big fan of the Underdark. I played in an Underdark campaign as my first campaign when I played D&D, so I've known nothing but it basically, and that campaign got cut short. So yeah, I hope you do
I
go
will
down there.
say that since you have a player who's playing a character from there, there is a good chance that you will end up in the Evernight on Sol'Boreal.
Yes, please.
So
um,
I guess that's all I can think of at the moment.
Yeah, no, this has been great. Basically, what we'll do is we will have I'll try and remember to put the link to the Homebrew Ash Elf page on D&D and Beyond in the video description, so you can check that out at your own leisure. There'll obviously be bits and bobs going in the Discord server, so make sure you're in there, because you'll get to know when all these videos go live, so you don't miss out on any content, especially this homebrew series that we're doing. This has been episode 3. This is just the start of the videos that we're going to be doing, centered around the different homebrew species. Of course, we've got all the different types of elves that we've talked about today. We've got the Quatling, which is a brand new kind of all homebrew race. We've got some Minotaur action in the future as well, so definitely stay tuned for that. And like I said at the end of the last video, if there's anything that we talk about that you think deserves like more attention, it deserves fleshing out, like let us know in the comments, and we can definitely dedicate episodes to those parts of the homebrew world and talk about them a bit more. But yeah, this has been us for today. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.
Thanks, guys.